Hello, I'm Lloyd Durda. I am the president of PsyChi, the Psychology Honors Society here on Stetson University's campus, and we host events related to the psychological sciences.
And I'm Ryan Maurer. I'm the president of RAD. We facilitate discussions about religious traditions and between religious traditions. And we're here with Dr. Paul Croce, a retired full professor at Stetson University, a professor of American Studies and History. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Croce.
In this video, Senior Professor of History and American Studies, Dr. Paul Croce, presents Scouting Beyond the Everyday, William James on Psychology at the Spiritual Depths, a presentation to PsyChi, the Stetson Psychology Honor Society, on February 19th, 2025.
My name is Paul Croce, and I've taught here at Stetson for over 3 decades, many moves. So I've seen a lot of changes here since 1988 when I first arrived part-time, and then I became full-time the next year. So my field was in history and American studies. So the field of history for looking back in the past, the field of American studies to look across disciplines. It's interdisciplinary. And some of the disciplines that I entered, that I looked at across, included science and religion, and included the history of psychology. And as you may know about your beloved professors, there's a lot of work they do that isn't out in front of the classroom, isn't for students, or isn't directly for students. But I think of it as kind of the feeding station for the things that happen in the classroom. Kind of like what Mahalia Jackson said of the pop music she sang. She said, well, when I go to church, that's my filling station. So doing research is our filling station for the things that you see more up front in the classroom. So I also think of the research that I've done in that filling station of research as work that I've done with depth. And the kind of work that I do in the classroom is more breadth, more range of ideas. And now that I've retired just this last year, I've shifted from the academic classroom, from 3 decades there of doing this depth and range of work that I've done, to what I've called the public classroom. And I started a webpage of that name, the public classroom. You can see the handle there. And for that, I'm continuing the work of range of ideas built on, drawing upon the depths of research I've done on William James. Now, William James is a very insightful historical figure. And he's quoted a lot. He's quoted on a building at Harvard. He's quoted in Hallmark cards. And he's such a wise guy that I thought, okay, if he's that wise, let's use him. And one of his fields is pragmatism, which is also called a philosophy of use. So let's use this philosopher of use for a range of ways to understand what's happening in our culture. Because haven't you noticed? There's a lot of tension and discouragement in our culture these days. And I think just listening to versions of the kind of wise thoughts that he has and adapted and drawing upon other fields of thought might be helpful. So that's what I do, and I brought some sampling of the kind of work I've done for the public classroom. So that's a little bit of background about how I got to today. And I mentioned to those who were here earlier that the journal Dialogue that I published in for this material that became the basis for this talk too. I call it More at the Core, and I'll explain more about more as I go along here. So I did, when preparing this, I thought, to be full disclosure, this is kind of an eggheady presentation. Now, full disclosure, I kind of have fun with thinking about this stuff, science and religion and psychology and thought, especially for ways to make broad use of potentially deep insights, hence the public classroom, the broad use of these ideas. So I'm going to present for about half of our time, and then I look forward to hearing your responses and your insights in the rest of the time. So do some pull chinning, think about what you hear here, and think about how you might respond, comment, critique on some of the ideas that I'm going to present about more at the core. William James on psychology at the spiritual depths. So James was a psychologist and a philosopher, and he used those fields to explore his personal fascination with religion. He was a founder of modern psychology, and his psychological explorations of religion contributed to the emergence of the field of religious studies. He was born in 1842 and grew up without our assumptions about school and grade levels. You know, now we're very definite, you know, you're in 6th grade, you're in 7th grade, you're in 11th grade, you're in 12th grade. That wasn't around. I mean, now we just take it for granted. That wasn't around then. And that's not that long ago to think of what kind of changes we had. And also there wasn't a formal curriculum, you know, like majors and stuff like that. In effect, he crafted his own general education, you could say, using our language, built on curiosity about how we think and believe, and how these ideas relate to the world around us, you know, what's in here, what's out there, and how those conceptions differ from each other, and how they can be understood in relation. That's where we get into the differences and disagreements, which I draw upon heavily for the public classroom. So I turn to a little bit of background on James's fascination with religion that began in his own childhood, listening to the spiritual ideas of his own father, whose name was Henry James. Now, by contrast with the more famous Henry James, who was his son, the second son in the family. William was the firstborn, and Henry James Jr. became a novelist, the famous novelist like of the Bostonians and other famous novels. William's interest in religion continued when he studied science, first chemistry, then anatomy and physiology, settling on medicine, which would become his only degree, before focusing on psychology, even though the field had not yet formed. In fact, he said jokingly toward the end of his life that the first lecture in psychology I ever heard was the first that I ever gave. So as psychology became more laboratory oriented, he turned to philosophy, which was an ongoing interest of his. So he finally focused on medicine in the 1860s. But as psychology became more laboratory oriented in the next few decades, first if the field formed, actually he helped form the field, and he turned to philosophy to understand the mind in lived experience, becoming one of the first pragmatist philosophers. So that's a basic element of pragmatist thinking, experience focus. His Gifford lectures on natural theology, that's the formal name of a place in Scotland, the Gifford lectures on natural theology that he delivered in 1901 and 1902 would become the Varieties of Religious Experience, which was published later that year in 1902. And that was the culmination of each branch of his own liberal education. He focused psychologically on religious experience. He focused philosophically on personal belief formation. He called his work a science of religions, providing a study in human nature. That was the subtitle of the book. And with identification of varieties, right in the title, he attended to diversity. So, his lectures were not only a culmination of his career, he also wrote them with a sense of urgency. He was facing death from a heart disease, a heart condition that he had fallen victim to just a few years earlier. And it would indeed take his life in 1910, in August of 1910. He had been collecting accounts of religious experience for years when his poor health forced him to postpone delivery of the lectures they had already invited him a few years earlier in 1899. And he said, I can't travel, I can't do this work. He rebounded enough in the next few years to take on this major inquiry into the depths of human experience and the far reaches of human hopes. He admitted that capturing religion in words was a task well nigh impossible, as he put it, but to attempt it is my religious act. His work has become a classic, although at the time, listening to those words that he said, an attempt, a task well nigh impossible, it shows a kind of gap between effort in the trenches of his work in researching for this book and the eventual success. That's a good reminder, I think, for students of all ages about the importance of working on what James would call do your daily pegging and don't hang on results. Just do good work. This brief biographical profile of personal James helps explain how writer James develops a very general definition of religion to serve as the center of his study. With his attention to experience, he focuses on what he calls personal religion. That was an innovation for the time. Rather than institutional structures, like churches, and theologies, the intellectual life of religion. Focus on personal religion. He suggests that personal religion, what today is generally called spirituality, both inside and outside of churches, is what he called the primordial thing. The primordial thing. While churches and theology live at second hand, taking energy and direction from those personal experiences. The individual in religious experience is in at least possible touch with something higher, something connected to a better part, even though it may be, for most of us, but a helpless germ. Not germ in the sense of disease, but a germ in the sense of like a seed. Despite personal limitations, this higher part is continuous with a more, which is operative in the universe outside of him, the believer, and which he can keep in working touch with, as he put it. His lifelong quest, his deep studies, and his sense of urgency personally for himself came down to one word: more. More. At the root of religion, religion is about the human connection to something more. So I'll use that word in somewhat of a playful way then to explain 4 dimensions of James's approaches to religion, each labeled with a word derived from his key concept of the more. So first, you can follow right along there, first there's the more of his psychology of religion, with description of the subconscious realms bridging our psychological depths to realms still more deep. 2, the religious ore, now spelled O-R-E, as in mining ore, his religious studies use of the more as raw material for how religion functions for different temperamental types in the transformations of conversion and in saintly behavior resulting from belief. You hope. 3rd, the choice-filled or, O-R, one or the other, either or, that kind of use of the word. His sociology of religion, with endorsement of religious differences beyond tolerance for the range of religions, supplying resources about the spiritual depths. And 4, the awestruck his theological, mystical awareness of mystery at the core of every religious claim, each approaching but never reaching comprehension of the more whose fullness lies beyond all of us. Every human approach contributes to our awareness, but in its elusive whole, religion remains, in a favorite phrase of his, ever not quite. So, I take off into these 4 sections here, starting with the psychological more. That's a self-portrait he did of himself in the 1860s when he was very discouraged before he had developed his own career path and decisions about how to be in life. When a person gets religion, she or he remains the same person physically, but is now transformed with motivation and hope that the non-religious person generally cannot muster. He talks about the center of our attention in his psychology with fringes at the margin. Center, fringes. I'm not looking at those sandwiches. I might want to, but they're in the fringes of my attention. And each human being is a psychical entity far more extensive than he or she knows. James followed the latest research in depth psychology emerging in the late 19th century and calling these maximums of our margins the subconscious or the subliminal parts of consciousness. These are parts of consciousness, but they're more recessed than our everyday consciousness. The subliminal, embedded within natural psychology, goes uncountably deep, offering a doorway to realms beyond, which may be the place of supernatural phenomena. With religion, people identify with what they perceive to constitute their higher part, their own part of the more. Of course, one person's higher commitment is another's capitulation to foolishness. We have differences. With none of us gaining full immunity from these risks, he counsels careful discernment with gravity of experience as our guide. That was how he dealt with that challenge. Because he said genuine religious sensibility says, hush to vain chatter and smart wit. Doesn't sound like a good Victorian phrase. And James does not get beyond vagueness in his own identification of what in particular the religious person encounters in the universe outside the self. And he suggests neither does anyone else, because these mysterious realms remain. Connecting to something more is important because this mortal life is full of frustrating limits. This produces an uneasiness for any one of us, with religion providing its solution, or something religious providing its solution. Not a correction to human problems, but ways to cope, which can kindle energy and motivation, where a non-religious, mundane, and even wholly rational reckoning with our situation can often lead to a life drained of hope. He expresses this idea even more simply in saying, here is the real core of the religious problem. Help? Help? I ain't enough. Since our worldly means are insufficient to solve all the problems of worldly existence, it is plausible to seek help, to seek for something more. That help, those solutions, are the psychological more of religion. By contrast, those without such hopes, beyond mere natural facts, are relegated to a position similar to that of a people living on a frozen lake. So imagine this. He's wonderful with metaphors. Here's a metaphor he used to describe the sense of not having hope. No escape from the frozen lake, yet they know little by little, those who live there, that the ice is melting and the inevitable day is drawing near when the last film of it will disappear. The warmer and more sparkling the sun, the more poignant the sadness with which one must take in the meaning of the total situation. This is our mortal coil, he points out, and religion is the seat of human hope for more. Now I turn to the second way of understanding James on religion, the religious studies or. By basing his religious inquiries on human psychology, James invites comparison with skeptics, who after all did the same thing, but with an eagerness to dismiss religion. He calls this perspective medical materialism, which assumes the dependence of mental states upon bodily conditions, with the view that that intense religious experiences are due, for example, to perverted action of various glands. This position assumes that a thing is exploded away, as he said, as soon as its origin is shown. He did not shy away from the criticism, but observed that the hooping together of religion and neurology offers a first step. So, recognizing that the experiences of people with religious beliefs are not outside of nature's orders, so he said with the skeptics, but that does not mean that they are nothing but natural, organic dispositions, as the reductionists would like to claim. To sort out claims, James was eager to support a science of religions, a line of inquiry which would become a major contributor to the academic study of religion. With his scientific stance on religion, he admitted that this approach might appear to be blowing hot and cold on those ready to defend particular religions, or to those eager to criticize them, for that matter. But his commitment was to the more general basis from which I say all religions proceed. Religion at its fiery core, then, includes most centrally the founders, along with most active, exuberant leaders in any group, and also the part of even average churchgoers most committed to the faith. The higher part in themselves, somewhat like the ideals that any of us can recognize when we talk about wearing our Sunday best. James elaborates on religious traits that emanate from this core, especially conversion and saintliness. Conversion brings a profound shift in attention for personal transformation. At its best, conversion brings practical fruits for life, including with saintly attitudes and actions. Neither religions in general, nor saints in particular, are perfect, but they bring a leaven, like bread, leavening of people to the righteousness available in the world. Their examples push us all to be saints, as he put it, if we can, even with small steps toward our better selves. Converts, saints, all believers, they gather around the resolution that all is not vanity in this universe, whatever the appearances may suggest. So from this strand of James's inquiries was his idea that religion at its core involves hope. Now to a third dimension of James on religion, the social or. As already implied in his other approaches, James offers ways to describe all religions, the psychological more, and the religious studies core of religious experiences provide a vision not only across many particular beliefs, but still more substantially beneath them. Beneath them. James is digging for the ore, the raw material that provides the sources for religious impulses, which then in turn flourish with extravagant diversity. Just look at all the different religions in the world. Their very variety of religions encourages appreciation for their underlying commonalities. The search for more, for the dynamics of conversion, and for saintly traits are also ways to present religion socially. Religions disagree on a host of outer forms, but all religious persons agree on the commitments and actions that issue from genuine religious devotion. James's approach offers a route to affirmation of religion in all its differences. A major challenge of such openness is that virtually every religion makes its own claim to a definitively accurate grasp on reality. This, of course, implies that other religions miss the mark. An overview of religions presents a sea of absolute claims. Now what? Well, James borrows from science, his study of science, to address this dilemma. All the insights of creatures like ourselves must be provisional. That means recognition of beliefs that seem utterly alien to someone else. If one set of beliefs is difficult for other believers to fathom, he reminds that for beliefs to make sense to some people, the deliverance must come in as strong a form as the complaint. Therefore, he predicted revivalistic, orgiastic religions with blood and miracles and supernatural operations may possibly never be displaced. Some constitutions, some personal constitutions, need them too much. There's real tension here in James between his openness to diversity, including ranges like that, and his philosophical awareness of the elusiveness of any truth. How to keep tolerant of the intolerant who insist on their own truths. He errs on the side of tolerance, with humble recognition of our mortal limitations. Given the imperfections of the human instrument, as he calls us, what would really be lost, he asks religious believers, if instead of absolute certainty, they only claim reasonable probability for their conclusions? While his approach may seem to be willfully playing into the hands of skeptics, he was careful to distinguish his position from their sea of wanton doubt, as he put it. So he ends up then with his conclusion that dogmatists also might condemn me, as he put it, because he seems to be keen to present himself as a steadfast supporter of religion in modern times. And that's where he serves as kind of a friend to religion in the court, so to speak, of the intellectual life and the scientific life. He's from that world, but he's defending those possibilities for beliefs that can't be reduced to science or intellectual life. So, as a friend away from the scientific scrutiny, and from that perch, he even suggests that without certainty, religion can actually gain more and more truth by moving away always in the right direction. The right direction. And that's the olive branch he throws out to traditional religion. If they're thinking, why are you doubting our truths? He says, think about you can actually gain by thinking about your own truths as always moving in the right direction, with personal transformation and saintly character to back it up. That could be persuasive to people. Got converts? That could be a way to encourage people to take your religion seriously, as we're all in this together in so many different religions in the world. The differences among religions, differences immense and those more subtle, each with its own exclusive claim, have been sources of great conflict too. James inverts these challenges by presenting the differences as resources for depth of natural and extra-natural understanding. Accept the differences. Diffuse their conflicts. He takes on the conventional wisdom directly. Ought it to be assumed that the lives of all people should be identical? Is the existence of so many religious types and sects and creeds regrettable? No, he said emphatically. Instead, we need those differences as steps toward comprehending the divine, which is, by general account, immense and mysterious. So it can be no single thing in our limited human reckoning. To no one type of person, whatever, is the total fullness of truth revealed, as he put it. In fact, some parts of truth may be seen better from some other person's point of view. Therefore, each attitude, being a syllable in human nature's total message, it takes the whole of us to spell it out completely. And because people are reliably fallible, he was also unblinking in evaluation of different beliefs. By their fruits ye shall know them, he says, paraphrasing the Bible, not by their roots. Hence his honest critique of some forms of religion, as I said, good fruits. But religion that produces steadfast convictions and healthy saintly traits are worthy of praise and support, even to those who find their roots, their explanatory sources, their elusive, inexplicable ideas, kind of distasteful. But keep an eye on those fruits. Now, to the fourth section in my overview of James, the mystical Throughout James's inquiries, there's an undertow of mystery. Paths through different disciplines, different temperaments, and varieties of religion might approach ultimate truths, but never get there fully. Just how anything operates in this region remains both a psychological and a theological mystery. The subliminal door, remember that the subconscious is other word for the subconscious, the subliminal door provides some understanding of the hither side of religion, kind of old-fashioned words like close toward you, hither side. So while the more points to its mysterious farther side, it's a door, one side or the other, one side or the other. So James admits that the mystical is often a term of reproach in some circles because associated with things vague and vast and sentimental, without a base in facts or logic. Yes, but its appeal is its elusiveness, in tune with much of life's own uncertainties. Don't we have a lot? Religious psychology resembles everyday psychology. Everyone's own experience is ultimately mysterious to every other person, as we know from every relationship, right? But we gain some access to those personal uncertainties through communication in words, gestures, creative acts. We approach even if we never reach understanding someone else. These enable some connections even as they remain incomplete. Yet, to those enraptured in the experience of personal connection with someone, that relation feels like a state of knowledge, one that makes us privy, even if only for fleeting moments, to depths of truth that in that treasured other person. Even as an outsider, may be looking onto that relationship and say, what do you see in that person? But these truths can seem like then the vertigo, as he put it, of self-contradiction to people outside. So, similarly, the experience of mysticism appears so nonsensical to those who are skeptical, and sometimes even to average believers, everyday believers. Different believers live with different levels of intensity then, and different levels of commitment. Mysticism is the purest ore, so to speak, of religion. It's the mine from which other beliefs derive their orientation and their strength. Faith is the everyday event, the circulating currency of religion, while mysticism is rare and pure, kind of like buried bullion, backing up the religious beliefs of the average churchgoer, providing the spiritual reserves, like banks do, reserves for everyday faith. James fittingly admitted that any words, any attempt to explain the depths of mystery as anything in particular inevitably falls short. Saying, it is this, seems implicitly to shut off, well, it's not that. So what is it? It's always elusive. Words simply cannot convey the full meaning of mysticism, and James was on a mission to try, however. Not to gain definitive answers, but to enlist understanding of the core meaning of religion as a vehicle for conciliating some of humanity's raging differences. James proposes that the conscious person is continuous with a wider self, available within the subliminal realm. These farther limits of our being plunge into an altogether other dimension of existence, a subliminal doorway offering potentials that are at once part of ourselves and yet not ourselves. The more forms the basis for the supernatural realms of various religions and the mysterious dimensions of depth psychology. James himself was content to seize what he called the chance of salvation with possibilities for religious truths. His religious task was to present more at the core of religions, both to affirm their beliefs and to chasten their excesses, while throughout fostering discovery of opportunities within the differences. Study of varieties of religious experience, the title of his book, also meant appreciation for varieties of human commitments. James's step away from and beneath institutional forms of religion has been important for the modern study of religion and perennially popular with wider audiences. It's still in bookstores. It's never been out of print. His view grabs attention both for their addition of new material and across denominations, across cultures, and across ideologies, and by pointing to the common factors at the root of humanity's religious diversity. He found far-flung frontiers deep within the subconscious realms of the human psyche, where he identifies a religious more connected to our everyday psychology and potentially reaching toward the external powers of each religious claim. Now, I'll wrap up about the more. So more simply, this philosopher of human experience delighted in the experience of reading outdoors. I mentioned, as some of you got here earlier, that he had a place in the Adirondacks. I put the little town's name there in the center there. And he would go there. That was his favorite place to write. And he said he liked to read, as he put it in a letter to his son, a wild tree to lean your back against, even with a book in hand, while sometimes putting it down without reading it. Was he being a slacker? Well, I guess you could say that, but really he was saying, as valuable as the learning is, maybe even more valuable are those moments of reflection on what it is that you're learning, on the implications and the applications of that learning. So he might appreciate this little wordplay I've been engaged in for this last few minutes here, this presentation as a way to frame the dimensions of his religious thought. They each offer a bridge across dimensions of our own experiences. You've got the psychological or connecting the secular and the religious. You've got the religious studies or suggesting relations among institutional structures and individual believers. The abundant choices of the social or. They point to factors that all religious impulses share. And you've got the mystical emphasizing the valuable mysteries generated by the limits of human understanding. Think of that. Value in limits. Value in shortcomings. He begins his account with reference to skeptical efforts to dismiss religion by reducing it to its worldly origins. I mentioned that medical materialism. That's his chapter 1. And he found support for religion in this path because origins are not the last word, but a first step for approaching religion's depths. He ends his study with humility about his or any effort to spin the wordless mysteries of spiritual experiences into words. He did much of his writing at a favorite spot. It still bears the sign William James Ledge. It's in the Adirondacks in New York. It was a writing corner with a grand view of nature's own more. While the body of the book contains much more, it's a pretty big doorstop here, even that hefty enterprise was still ever not quite. And I leave it that with no more that I had planned, but with more of your ideas in response. So, thank you.